The wedding bells echoed across the garden, but when the black Rolls-Royce stopped at the red carpet, every camera turned away from the bride. He froze. The man who once told me I wasn't good enough to stand beside him was now watching me step out in gold, and beside me, the billionaire everyone whispered about. The air shifted. The guests stopped clapping. Even the bride's smile began to tremble. I didn't come for revenge. I came to return something he once took, my dignity. He invited me because he thought I was still poor, still broken, still begging for his approval. But as I walked past him, his proud smirk vanished, replaced by the face of a man who just realized that some losses can't be measured in money. And that day, standing between luxury and shame, he finally saw what true wealth looks like. It wasn't the Rolls-Royce. It wasn't the billionaire beside me. It was the peace in my eyes, the one thing he could never buy. But to understand how I reached that moment, how the woman he once called a failure became the one who made him tremble, we need to go back to the day the invitation arrived. I still remember the sound of that morning. The clock ticked louder than usual, and the rain outside painted the world in shades of gray, as if even the sky knew that something was coming. When I opened the mailbox, I didn't expect gold, but there it was. A shimmering envelope, sealed with wax, carrying his name. The man who once told me I would never be enough had remembered me. The handwriting hadn't changed. Elegant, precise. It was the same hand that had once held mine and promised forever. Before letting go the moment I lost my job, my confidence, and the version of myself that believed love could pay rent. I stood there staring at the invitation. A wedding invitation. His wedding. For a long moment I didn't breathe. Every letter felt like a small cut across my heart. He hadn't written a note, not even a line, just a printed message. Join us in celebrating new beginnings. New beginnings. How poetic, I thought. For him, it was a celebration. For me, it was a reminder that some men only love when the world is watching. I closed the envelope and laughed, quietly, bitterly. He had invited me because he thought I was still that poor ex-wife, living in a rented room somewhere, counting coins and memories. He wanted to see me defeated. He wanted me to witness his success. But what he didn't know was that success has many shapes, and the one I found didn't wear a suit. It wore patience. That night, I placed the invitation on my dresser. I told myself I wouldn't go, that it was beneath me to even think about it. But deep down, a voice whispered, "You're not the same woman he left behind." I looked around my apartment. No, not an apartment anymore. A home. A quiet, warm place that smelled of vanilla candles and fresh roses. I had built it with my own hands, piece by piece after everything collapsed. The rain had stopped, and the city lights blinked through the window. I poured myself a glass of wine, held the envelope to the flame of a candle, and stopped. Something inside me refused to burn it. Maybe curiosity, maybe closure, or maybe said destiny. The next morning, I walked to the mirror and stared at my reflection. The woman looking back wasn't poor. She wasn't broken. She had scars, yes. But they shimmered under the light like reminders of storms survived. Still, I whispered to her, "Why does this still hurt?" Because pain has memory. And mine remembered everything. The nights he came home smelling of perfume that wasn't mine. The silence that replaced love. The words that killed more softly than any weapon. You'll never understand my world. His world, the world of money, suits, and status, had once rejected me. But what he didn't know was that life had introduced me to another kind of world. One built not on arrogance, but on grace. Weeks before that envelope arrived, I had met someone. A man who didn't ask what I could offer, only who I truly was. He didn't wear luxury as a crown. He carried peace as his power. He saw me, even when I couldn't see myself. And in that quiet seeing, something within me healed. The invitation sat on my table for 3 days. Every time I looked at it, I felt the weight of the past and the spark of something new. Maybe it was foolish curiosity. Maybe it was pride. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to that wedding as a victim. If I went, I would go as a lesson. I called him, the man who had entered my life like sunlight after years of rain. His voice was calm, deep, steady. "You should go," he said, not to prove anything to him, but to remind yourself of who you've become. I hesitated. "And if I break?" "Then I'll be there to help you rise again," he answered. His name was Daniel. He didn't talk much about business, but everyone seemed to know him. The whispers called him the quiet billionaire. And maybe that's what I loved most about him. The silence he carried, the strength it held. The day of the wedding drew near. I bought a simple dress, soft gold, not flashy, but royal in its own right. It wasn't revenge I wanted. It was peace. Peace dressed in elegance. But when Daniel handed me a set of car keys, I froze. The emblem shone under the light, silver, proud, unmistakable. A Rolls-Royce. "You'll need an entrance that matches your worth," he said, smiling. I wanted to argue, to say no. But something in his eyes told me that this was bigger than pride. It was purpose. That night, I placed the keys next to the invitation. Two symbols of my past and my future. One sent to remind me of pain, the other to remind me of power. When the sun rose, I stood by the window and whispered to myself, "You once walked away with nothing. Tomorrow, you'll arrive with everything that truly matters." And for the first time in years, I smiled. Not because I had won, but because I no longer needed to. But as I looked into the mirror one last time before that wedding, I saw something strange in my reflection. Not fear, not pride, but destiny waiting to reveal its face. The mirror was honest that morning. Too honest. As I brushed my hair, I caught a glimpse of someone I used to know. The girl who waited by the window for love to come home, who mistook silence for safety and sacrifice for devotion. I almost didn't recognize her. That woman once believed that if she loved harder, he'd stay. That if she worked longer hours, he'd be proud. That if she smiled through the pain, he'd see her worth. But he never did, because men like him never look down to see who's holding them up. I remember the nights I counted coins at the kitchen table while he talked about investments I didn't understand. He said money was freedom, and I believed him. I just didn't know that for some people, freedom meant leaving. The woman I used to be would have cried at that invitation. The woman I am now poured a cup of coffee instead. Black, strong, unapologetic. She doesn't beg anymore. She doesn't chase love that demands permission. Still, as I looked at my reflection, I whispered to her, "You did the best you could, and maybe that's all any of us can do before life decides to rebuild us from the ruins." I put on the dress, gold, soft against my skin, but heavy with meaning. Every thread felt like a promise I had made to myself. Never again would I shrink to fit inside someone else's pride. Daniel watched quietly as I adjusted my earrings. There was admiration in his eyes, not desire, not pity, just deep, steady admiration. The kind that says you're home now. "You're quiet," he said. "Memories," I replied. "Painful ones? Necessary ones?" He nodded. "Don't hide them. They made you priceless." I smiled. Not because of his words, but because I finally believed them. When we stepped outside, the sky was blindingly clear. No clouds, no rain, no shadows. Almost as if the universe had decided, today, the light belongs to her. The Rolls-Royce gleamed under the sun, its silver lines reflecting every lesson I had learned. Grace, patience, restraint. It wasn't just a car. It was a symbol of how far I'd come. As we drove, I watched the city blur past, the same streets where I once walked in cheap shoes, carrying grocery bags and heartbreak. Now I was gliding through them in silence, my past chasing me like a reflection on glass. My thoughts drifted to the beginning, the woman I used to be. Back then, I was small, not because I lacked dreams, but because I lived inside his. He liked control. He liked being the one who decided where we went, what we ate, who we became. And I allowed it, because I thought love meant losing yourself to be found by someone else. The night he left was quiet. No fight, no tears, just finality. He looked at me across the living room and said, "You deserve someone who can give you more." But what he really meant was, "You deserve someone richer." And that night, I realized that money doesn't just buy comfort. Sometimes, it buys permission to be cruel. I spent months trying to understand what I'd done wrong. I rewrote our story 1,000 times in my head, searching for the sentence where I lost him. But eventually, I learned something life-changing. You can't lose what was never meant for you. The car slowed near the gates of the wedding venue. White roses everywhere, violins playing faintly in the distance. My heart didn't race, it hummed. Not from fear, but from peace. Daniel reached over and gently held my hand. "You don't owe anyone your silence anymore," he said softly. "If you want to leave, we leave." "No," I said. "I came to remember, and to let go." He nodded, then smiled. "Then let them see what grace looks like when it heals." The driver opened my door. For a moment, I just sat there, staring at the life I had once wanted so badly. Chandeliers, champagne, expensive laughter that sounded like glass about to break. And then I stepped out. Every head turned. Every whisper froze. It wasn't the Rolls-Royce. It wasn't the dress. It was the calm. Because true power doesn't shout. It arrives, quietly. He was there. My ex-husband. Tall, polished, rehearsed. The kind of man who practices his smile in mirrors before events like this. Our eyes met, and for a moment, time folded in on itself. I saw the night he left, the words he said, the tears I never showed. And then, the woman I used to be, fading behind the woman I had become. "Welcome," he said, pretending surprise. "You came." I smiled faintly. "You invited me?" His fiancée stood beside him, glowing in diamonds. She looked at me the way rich people look at rain. Inconvenient, but inevitable. "It's good to see you," he added. "Is it?" I asked gently. "Because the last time we spoke, you said I'd never belong in your world." He cleared his throat, forcing a laugh. "That was a long time ago." I leaned slightly closer. "Yes, and I'm grateful it was." The silence between us grew heavy. People watched, waiting for something dramatic, but I had already said enough. I turned to walk inside, and that's when I saw it. A reflection in the glass door. Me, in gold, walking beside a man whose calm could silence a storm. And behind us, him, still standing where I left him years ago. Some distances can't be measured in miles, only in growth, but the night was far from over. Because destiny always demands a second encounter. The music played softly in the background. Violins, laughter, a voice announcing names I didn't care to remember. I stood at the edge of the garden, pretending to admire the flowers, but all I could see were ghosts. Every sound, every face, every glass of champagne. It all reminded me of a world that once broke me. Because before this calm, there was chaos. It began the day I lost my job. He didn't look angry, just inconvenienced, as if my failure had embarrassed him. "You'll find something soon," he said, adjusting his cufflinks. "Just don't make it everyone's problem." I nodded, trying to swallow my shame. But something in his tone, the coldness of it, told me that love had already left the room. Days became weeks. I started freelancing, cleaning apartments, doing small projects just to survive. And every night, I prayed that things would get better. Instead, they got worse. He stopped answering my calls when he worked late. He started saying, "I'm tired," instead of "I miss you." And one evening, when I asked if he still loved me, he said, "Love doesn't pay the bills." That was the night everything inside me cracked. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply packed a small bag, left my wedding ring on the table, and walked out. The rain soaked through my coat, but somehow it felt like freedom. Painful, raw freedom. For months, I drifted between places, between versions of myself. I stayed in a small apartment where the walls whispered silence and the floorboards creaked like broken promises. Some nights, I'd wake up reaching for him and find nothing but air. I thought that was loneliness, but it was healing in disguise. Because sometimes life has to take everything away before it gives you back what you truly deserve. In the corner of that lonely apartment, I began writing again. Not for money, not for anyone. Just to remember what my own voice sounded like. I wrote about strength I didn't yet have, about love that didn't hurt, about women who rose from ashes. And somehow, through every word, I rebuilt myself. That's when I met Daniel. At first, he was just a stranger who noticed my books at the cafe. He asked me what I was reading. I told him, stories about people who lose everything and still find peace. He smiled. Then you're exactly where you need to be, he said. We met again and again. And every time he asked nothing of me, only listened. Until one day, he said something that changed everything. You don't need to be rescued. You just need to remember who you were before someone told you you weren't enough. That line stayed with me because that was the moment I realized the woman I used to be wasn't weak. She was just unprotected. And this new version of me? She didn't need armor made of anger or diamonds. She carried her peace like a weapon, silent but unbreakable. Back in the present, I looked around the wedding hall. The chandeliers shimmered above, golden light spilling over marble floors. The kind of place that once would have made me feel small. Now it only reminded me of how far I'd come. Across the room, my ex-husband was laughing, too loud, too forced. He didn't see me watching him, but I saw everything. The insecurity behind the smile, the way his eyes flicked toward me every few seconds. His fiancée leaned in to whisper something and he nodded. The same nod he used to give me when pretending to listen. Funny how people change, or maybe they just repeat the same story with new characters. A waitress passed by with champagne. I declined. I didn't need bubbles to feel powerful tonight. As I stood there, one of the guests approached me, an older woman, kind eyes, soft voice. "My dear, you look so familiar," she said. "Were you part of the groom's family?" I smiled. "Once," I said quietly, "a very long time ago." Her eyes widened, and for a moment I could tell. She knew. Everyone in that room would know soon. But I didn't flinch, because truth, when carried with grace, stops being scandal and becomes legacy. I walked toward the open doors that led to the garden, letting the evening air touch my skin. I needed space, because the ghosts of my past were starting to whisper again. I remembered the nights when I had nothing, no money, no friends, no hope. The woman I used to be would have broken at the sight of this wedding. But the woman I am now, she only sees poetry in the irony. Because he thought I'd never rise without him. And yet here I am, standing taller than the lies he built his pride on. Daniel appeared beside me, silent as always. "You're holding yourself together beautifully," he said. "I'm not holding," I replied softly. "I'm standing." He smiled. "That's even stronger." The music changed, the cue for the bride and groom to make their entrance. The crowd clapped, cameras flashed. But my eyes, they were elsewhere. Because in that moment, I realized something deeper. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reflection. About seeing who I used to be, one last time, before saying goodbye to her forever. And that realization, that quiet peace, scared me more than anger ever could. But peace never lasts long where pride lives. And before the night ended, someone would remind me that even healed hearts can be tested. The reception had begun. Laughter floated through the air like perfume. Too sweet, too heavy, too fake. the kind of joy that photographs well but fades the moment the camera stops clicking. Daniel stood beside me, calm as ever. He didn't need to say a word. His presence was enough to steady the noise inside me. He was the kind of man who didn't fill silence. He elevated it. We moved through the crowd, hand in hand, his quiet confidence wrapping around me like armor. Every woman watched him. Every man wondered who he was. And every whisper followed us, sharp and curious. Is that her new husband? He's so much younger. He looks powerful. But Daniel didn't flinch. He didn't try to perform or compete. He simply smiled at me like I was the only one there. And in that moment, I was. The bride approached us, all glitter and nerves. Her smile trembled slightly, like a candle in the wind. "I'm so glad you came," she said. Her tone carried that fragile mixture of politeness and pity. "I'm glad too," I replied, my voice soft, steady. Weddings remind us how far we've come, and what we've left behind. She blinked, unsure whether it was a compliment or a confession. Before she could reply, Daniel extended his hand. "Congratulations," he said. "It's a beautiful evening." His tone was warm, effortless. But beneath it, there was weight. A quiet authority that made people listen, even when he spoke little. The bride thanked him, her eyes darting between us. And then, from behind her, came him, my ex-husband. Perfectly dressed, perfectly rehearsed. But something in his eyes betrayed the perfection. Unease. "You made it," he said, forcing a smile. "I did," I answered. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." He glanced at Daniel, extending his hand. "And you must be—" "Daniel," he said simply. "Her husband." That word, husband, hung in the air like music that no one dared interrupt. I saw it land, saw how it cracked through his pride, quiet but deep. He laughed lightly, but his eyes were no longer smiling. "I didn't realize you remarried." "Not everything worth knowing is posted online," I said gently. Daniel looked at me with that almost imperceptible smile, the kind that said you handled that beautifully. The conversation died the way small talk often does, abruptly, mercifully. He excused himself under the pretense of greeting other guests. But as he walked away, his shoulders weren't as straight. I took a sip of water, feeling the weight lift off me. Daniel leaned closer. "You were flawless," he whispered. "Was I?" "Yes, because you didn't let his shadow touch your light." I smiled, eyes fixed on the shimmering surface of my glass. "I used to think silence was weakness," I said quietly. "Now I know. It's power." He nodded. "It always has been. You just needed someone to hold the quiet with you." For a moment, everything around us blurred. The music, the laughter, the lights. It was just him and me, the calm and the storm. But peace never stays untested. Later, as the dinner began, the host asked all couples to share how they met. A cruel little game disguised as tradition. I could almost feel my ex smirking from across the room. Daniel turned to me, eyes soft but unreadable. "Do you want to go first?" he asked. I nodded, lifting my glass. "We met on a day when I had nothing," I began. "And he offered me something money can't buy. Peace." There was silence. Even the music seemed to pause. "He didn't save me," I continued. "He saw me, and that changed everything." A few guests smiled politely. Others looked intrigued. But across the table, my ex was staring at me, the way people stare at paintings they can't afford. Then it was his turn. He cleared his throat, pretending to laugh. "Well, not every story has such poetry," he began. "Some of us learn the hard way that love and money don't always mix." The crowd chuckled awkwardly, but I knew what he meant. It wasn't a joke, it was a jab. Daniel didn't react. He just placed his hand gently over mine. That single gesture silenced the entire room. No glare, no words. Just composure that screamed, "I don't compete with insecurity." After that, people began to talk again, laugh again, pretend again. But the energy had shifted. He could feel it. Everyone could. Later that night, as we stood under the moonlight, Daniel looked at me and said, "You've already won, you know." "Have I?" "Yes, because you're free." I looked up at the stars, feeling that truth sink in. Freedom didn't look like wealth or status. It looked like peace in the middle of chaos. It looked like not needing to prove yourself to anyone, not even to the ones who hurt you. He pulled me closer. "You don't owe your past a performance," he said, "only a farewell." And in that silence, I realized Daniel wasn't just the man beside me. He was the metaphor for everything I had learned. That real power doesn't need to shout. It just arrives. But peace, as I would soon discover, has a price. And sometimes, the past doesn't like being left behind. There's a kind of silence that isn't quiet. It's commanding. And that night, I became that silence. Every step I took seemed to echo through the marble hall. Not because the heels were loud, but because the woman wearing them finally understood her worth. The whispers followed me. Admiration, jealousy, curiosity. But none of them mattered. For the first time, I wasn't walking into his world. I was walking through it, untouched, unshaken, untouchable. I caught a glimpse of him across the room. He was laughing too loudly again. It was the laugh of a man trying to drown out the noise of his own regret. Our eyes met, and in that instant, I saw it. The flicker of something raw, something unguarded. Fear. Not fear of me, but fear of what I had become without him. He walked over, his steps hesitant but rehearsed. "You look different," he said, his voice low. "I am," I replied softly. "That's what healing does." He chuckled nervously. "I didn't realize you'd moved on. You didn't realize a lot of things." The words slipped out effortlessly. Not sharp, not cruel, just true. He looked at Daniel standing nearby, calm as a statue carved from serenity itself. And for a moment, I could almost see the questions forming behind his eyes. Why her? Why not me? Daniel caught my gaze and smiled, not possessively, proudly. The kind of pride that doesn't say, "She's mine," but "She's free." That was the moment I understood what real partnership felt like. Not ownership, but alignment. The music changed again, slower, warmer. Couples began to dance under golden lights. Daniel extended his hand. "May I?" I hesitated for a second. Not because I didn't want to, but because I knew who was watching. "Of course," I said, placing my hand in his. As we moved to the rhythm, the room faded away. All I could feel was the pulse of something steady and safe. The kind of peace that used to feel foreign, but now lived in my bones. He held me with care, not possession. Every turn felt like an unwritten promise. You are seen, you are safe, you are home. From the corner of my eye, I saw my ex watching, glass in hand, smile tight. It wasn't jealousy that filled his eyes, it was realization. Because the woman he once left behind was now the center of gravity in every room she entered. And not because she was beautiful, but because she was free. After the dance, Daniel excused himself for a moment. I stood by the terrace, feeling the night air brush against my skin. The world felt lighter somehow. Even the stars seemed closer. Then I heard his voice again. "You've changed." I turned. He stood behind me, hands in his pockets, eyes darker than before. "People change," I said simply. "Not like this," he muttered. "Then maybe you've been looking in the wrong places." He sighed, taking a step closer. "I didn't mean to hurt you. But you did. You have no idea how hard it was for me, too." I looked at him, unflinching. "No, I know exactly how hard it was, for me." He tried to smile, but it came out broken. "You always had a way of making me feel small." "No," I said softly. I just stopped making myself smaller for you." For a second, neither of us spoke. The air between us was heavy, not with love, but with truth. Then he said it. "I made a mistake. It should have felt satisfying. It should have felt like victory. But it didn't, because I had already forgiven him the moment I stopped needing his apology." I stepped closer, my voice calm. "You didn't make a mistake. You made a choice, and so did I. I chose to stop bleeding for people who only ever watch me heal." His eyes softened, filled with something like sadness. But it was too late. The version of me who would have cried at his regret no longer existed. "You look happy," he said. "I am." "With him? With myself." He nodded slowly, defeated. "You deserve it. I know." He smiled faintly, then looked away, like a man staring at something he can't touch anymore. And maybe that's exactly what I had become. Untouchable. Daniel returned just then, slipping an arm around my waist. The gesture wasn't to claim, it was to comfort. A quiet reminder that love could exist without control. "Everything all right?" he asked softly. "Yes," I whispered, just closing a chapter. He looked into my eyes for a long moment, and then said, "Sometimes closure isn't a door closing. It's a heart opening again." And I realized he was right, because for the first time I didn't feel like the woman he lost. I felt like the woman I was always meant to become, but stories like mine don't end with peace alone. Because when power shifts, pride always tries to find a way back. The music swelled again, violins rising, petals falling. The bride stood under the arch of white roses, her diamond tiara trembling just slightly under the heat of the lights. Guests whispered, cameras flashed, and champagne sparkled in tall crystal flutes. Everything was perfect. Almost too perfect. I stood near the back of the hall, my hand gently resting on Daniel's arm. We hadn't come to steal attention, but attention has a way of finding truth, even when it tries to hide behind gold and glitter. He looked at me, his calm steady as ever. "You okay?" he asked quietly. "I'm fine," I said. "Just watching the play I once auditioned for." He smiled, just barely. "And they missed the best actress." The officiant began to speak, his words solemn and heavy with tradition. But my thoughts drifted, not to the bride, not to the vows, but to the woman I used to be, sitting in the same kind of room, waiting for love to notice her. I didn't know it then, but love wasn't late. It was just waiting for me to grow strong enough to meet it halfway. When the couple exchanged vows, I felt an odd stillness inside me. Not pain, not bitterness. Closure. The kind of peace that feels like exhaling after years of holding your breath. But peace is fragile, especially when pride sits in the same room. After the ceremony, as guests began to mingle, I saw him, my ex-husband, walking toward me with that same rehearsed smile. It was the smile that used to fool me. Not anymore. "You didn't tell anyone you were coming," he said lightly. "I didn't plan to announce it," I replied. "Some entrances don't need introductions." He laughed softly, searching my face. "You look radiant." "Peace has that effect," I said. He hesitated. "I wanted to thank you for coming." "Why?" "Because it means there are no hard feelings." I tilted my head slightly. "Oh, there were," I said softly. "They just no longer belong to me." For a second, his mask slipped. And I saw it, the flicker of guilt, the ache of memory. The same man who once looked down on me now couldn't even meet my eyes. Daniel appeared beside me then, silent but unmissable. He didn't interrupt. He didn't need to. His presence spoke volumes. Calm, authority, quiet love. My ex straightened his tie. "So this is the man?" he said. "Yes," Daniel replied before I could answer. "The one who saw her value before the world did." The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut glass. The bride, noticing the tension from across the room, called his name. He turned halfway, torn between appearances and conscience. "It was good to see you again," I said. "Was it?" he asked, voice lower now. It was necessary. I started to walk away, but his voice stopped me. Wait. He looked desperate now, the calm gone, the charm cracking. I just need to know, are you happy? I turned, meeting his gaze head on. More than you'll ever understand. He swallowed, eyes searching mine for something that wasn't there anymore. Love. Need. Power. He found none of it. Only freedom. The crowd around us began to notice the tension, murmurs spreading like ripples through water. I didn't move. I didn't hide. I simply stood there. A vision of the woman he never thought I'd become. And that's when it happened. The master of ceremonies, eager to lighten the atmosphere, announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for the couple's dance. Everyone, please take the floor." The bride looked radiant, though her smile seemed forced. My ex extended his hand toward her, but his eyes were still on me. Daniel leaned in and whispered, "Let him look. You're a mirror now, and mirrors don't chase reflections." I smiled faintly, because he was right. We walked to the edge of the dance floor, not to join, but to watch. And as they began to move to the music, my mind drifted again, not to loss, but to gratitude, because everything that broke me had quietly built me instead. When the song ended, applause filled the hall, and then a voice called from the microphone, "We'd love to hear a few words from the bride and groom's closest friends." Before I could step back, the crowd's attention turned to me. Whispers, cameras, anticipation. Even he looked shocked. I smiled politely and took the mic. "I'm not sure what to say," I began softly, "but I suppose I should thank the bride and groom for the invitation." A quiet laugh rippled through the audience. "This evening reminded me that love isn't about winning or losing," I continued. "It's about growing, even when growth means outgrowing someone." The hall fell silent. Even the music seemed to stop breathing. "So, to the bride and groom, may you never mistake power for peace or pride for love." I handed back the mic, smiled, and turned to leave. The air felt lighter as I walked away, like the end of a chapter written too long ago. But as I reached the door, I heard footsteps behind me, fast, familiar. "Wait," he said again. "Why?" "Because I can't let you just walk away like this." I turned slowly, meeting his eyes one last time. "You already did," I said. And with that, I stepped outside, into the night, into freedom, into a world that finally matched my worth. But destiny wasn't finished writing, because the next morning, a headline would appear, one that none of us could have expected. I didn't sleep that night, not because I was haunted, but because silence felt different when it came from peace instead of pain. The city outside was still awake, lights flickering in distant windows, cars whispering past on wet streets. Daniel was reading near the window, his posture as calm as ever. He didn't ask what I was thinking. He already knew. "You said goodbye tonight," he murmured. "Yes," I said, "to more than just him." He looked at me over the edge of his book. "Then rest, because tomorrow the world will know who you've become." I smiled faintly, not understanding what he meant. Not yet. The next morning the world did wake up to my face. Only, not in the way I expected. When I reached for my phone, dozens of notifications flooded the screen. Headlines, mentions, messages from people I hadn't heard from in years. My heart raced. For a moment, I thought something terrible had happened. But when I opened one of the messages, I froze. It was a photo. That photo. Someone, a wedding photographer, maybe, had captured the exact moment our eyes met across the ceremony. Me in gold, serene. Him in black, smiling. But not really smiling. The image was sharp, cinematic, almost staged. But it wasn't. The caption beneath it read, "The look that silenced the wedding." And just like that, my private story had become public spectacle. Within hours, the image was everywhere. Twitter, Instagram, even morning news channels. Some called it, "The Billionaire's Ex Returns." Others named it Elegance Meets Revenge. But the one that stuck, the one that spread fastest, was the look that changed everything. Comments poured in. She's the definition of grace. This is revenge done right. She didn't say a word, and that's what made it powerful. Women from all over the world shared the image, in different languages, different tones, but the same message. She became everything they said she couldn't. For a moment, I just sat there, staring at the screen. It didn't feel real. That quiet moment, born from years of pain and growth, had now become a mirror for millions of women who had felt small, and were done being small. Daniel appeared behind me, coffee in hand. He looked at the screen, then at me. "I told you," he said softly. "The world was waiting for your story." "But I didn't tell it," I said, still stunned. "Exactly," he replied. "Sometimes the truth doesn't need a narrator. It just needs a moment." The doorbell rang. Journalists, of course. We didn't answer. The world would make its own version of the story anyway. Later that day, I walked outside for a breath of air. People stared, some smiled, others whispered. It was strange, being seen for something that wasn't performance, but presence. That night, my inbox filled again. Messages from women I didn't know. One read, "I saw your photo. I left my husband today. Thank you." Another said, "I've been afraid to start over, but you reminded me that I can." I read each one slowly, tears blurring the screen. It was overwhelming. Not the fame, not the attention, but the realization that pain, when healed, becomes purpose. Daniel watched quietly. "You changed something today," he said. "I didn't plan to." "Exactly. That's why it worked." A few days later, an article appeared in a major magazine. "The Woman Who Redefined Revenge." They called me the Silent Storm, the one who turned humiliation into dignity without uttering a single cruel word. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same world that once judged me for being too quiet now celebrated my silence. Funny how the universe works. How it rewards you when you stop trying to prove yourself and simply become yourself. One evening, as we watched the news replay the clip for the 100th time, Daniel said something I'll never forget. "You know why that photo went viral?" "Because it's dramatic," I said, half smiling. "No," he replied. "Because people are starving for women who rise without destroying. You didn't win by fighting. You won by walking away beautifully." I looked at him. This man who had never tried to outshine me, never tried to fix me. And I finally understood what love was supposed to feel like. Safe. Still. Strong. But not everyone saw it that way. A few days later, a headline began circulating, one written not out of admiration, but envy. "The billionaire's ex-wife. Did she plan the viral moment?" The tone was cold, the implication cruel. Suddenly, the same world that lifted me up began to question my intentions. I should have expected it. After all, when a woman stands tall, someone always tries to cut her down to size. Daniel closed the laptop calmly. "Don't defend yourself," he said. "But let silence answer them again." And I did, because sometimes silence doesn't mean surrender. It means sovereignty. The next morning, the phone rang. It was a call from a producer, a documentary, a book deal, a chance to tell my side. I thanked them, but said no. Because some stories aren't meant to be retold. They're meant to be lived, quietly, fully, freely. That evening, as the sun set over the city, Daniel and I watched the skyline fade into gold. The same color as the dress I wore that night. The same color as victory. Not the loud kind, but the graceful one. But just as I thought the storm had passed, fate knocked once more. Not with pain this time, but with a letter that would reopen everything I thought I'd closed. It was a Thursday evening when the letter arrived. Handwritten, folded neatly, no return address, only my name on the front, in handwriting I hadn't seen in years. I stared at it for a long time. The world outside was quiet, the kind of silence that only comes when rain is about to fall. Daniel was out on a business call, and for the first time in weeks, the apartment felt still again. I turned the envelope over in my hands. Part of me wanted to throw it away. The other part, the one that still believed closure comes in whispers, not storms, told me to open it. Inside there was a single page. No greeting, no signature, just words that bled honesty. I saw the photo, the one everyone's talking about. I didn't know one look could undo years of pretending. My heart tightened. I read on. You were right. I didn't leave because you weren't enough. I left because I wasn't. The words blurred. Not because they hurt, but because they came too late. When I met you, I wanted love. But I also wanted to be seen as powerful. You loved me for who I was, but I hated that you could see the parts of me I was ashamed of. So I blamed you for my own emptiness. A tear slipped down my cheek, slow and soundless. Not for him. For the years I spent believing I was the problem. When I lost you, I realized something. Money doesn't build men. It exposes them. And it exposed me completely. I sat there, the paper trembling in my hands. Each sentence was a confession and a mirror, reflecting not who he was now, but who I had been back then. He wrote, I wanted to call you, but every time I tried, I remembered the look you gave me that night. Calm, unshakable, free. I knew you had already forgiven me, but I hadn't forgiven myself. I closed my eyes. Forgiveness. The word felt heavy, yet strangely gentle. For years I thought forgiving him would mean letting him back in. But now, sitting there in the quiet glow of the evening, I understood. Forgiveness was never about him. It was about setting myself free from the weight of the memory. The last line read, I hope you find peace in a world that I never learned how to live in. That was all. No apology, no plea, just honesty, raw and unfinished. I folded the letter carefully, almost tenderly, and placed it on the table beside me. Then I sat back, breathing deeply. When Daniel returned, he noticed the envelope immediately. Who's it from? He asked. A ghost, I said softly. He didn't need to ask which one. He just sat beside me waiting. I handed him the letter. He read it slowly, his expression unreadable. When he finished, he placed it back on the table. Does it change anything? He asked. No, I said. But it completes something. He nodded, understanding. That's what I loved about him. He never asked me to forget my past. He just made peace with the fact that it existed. We sat there in silence for a long time. Rain began to fall outside, soft and steady, washing the world clean. He finally saw you, Daniel said after a while. Maybe, I replied. But I saw myself first. He smiled. That's why he lost you. I looked at him, the man who never raised his voice, never competed with my pain, never tried to own my healing. And I realized something powerful. Love isn't about who stays the longest. It's about who helps you find yourself again. The next day, I went to the garden, the same one where the wedding had taken place. It was empty now, the decorations gone, just the echo of vows and violin notes lingering in the air. I walked to the arch where they had stood and placed the letter beneath a single white rose. No ceremony, no speech, just a quiet act of release. As the wind picked up, the paper lifted, fluttered, and disappeared into the sky. I smiled, because some things are meant to be carried away, not kept. That night, I sat on the balcony watching the city lights blur into gold. Daniel brought 2 cups of tea and sat beside me. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. Sometimes peace doesn't arrive with answers. It arrives when the questions stop mattering. But destiny wasn't finished yet, because a week later, a familiar voice would call, not his, but hers. It was almost midnight when the call came. I didn't recognize the number, but something in me knew who it was before I even answered. Hello? Silence. Then, a soft, trembling voice. It's me. I hope you don't hang up." It was her, the bride, the woman whose wedding had been my closure, and her beginning. I didn't say anything at first. She filled the silence quickly, her words spilling like a confession trying to escape before courage disappeared. "I know you don't owe me anything," she said, "but I need to talk to you. Please, just once." There was something in her tone, fear, maybe, or shame, that made me listen. I agreed to meet her the next day at a quiet cafe downtown. The morning air was crisp and clear. I arrived early, out of habit more than courtesy. When she walked in, she looked smaller than she had at the wedding. No diamonds this time. Just a simple coat and eyes that carried the weight of a secret. She sat across from me, hands shaking around her cup. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then she said, barely above a whisper, "He told me not to come." I looked at her, really looked at her. And for the first time, I didn't see competition. I saw another woman trapped in a story she didn't write. "Why did you?" I asked. "Because I can't live with what I know," she said. "And I think you deserve to know, too." Her eyes glistened, and in that moment, I knew. This wasn't about guilt. It was about truth clawing its way to the surface. She took a deep breath. "The day he left you," she began, "he came to me. But not because he loved me, because he thought I could fix what he broke." She looked down at her cup, tears trembling at the edge of her lashes. "He told me he was drowning in debt, that the company was collapsing. He said marrying me, my family's money, was the only way to save himself." I froze. Her words hung in the air like smoke, impossible to grasp but impossible to ignore. "I thought he loved me," she whispered. "But when I saw the way he looked at you at the wedding, I knew." My heart didn't break, it opened. Because in that instant I finally understood. He hadn't left me because I was poor. He left because he was. Not in money, but in character. I leaned back, exhaling slowly. The truth didn't sting. It soothed. It was like hearing the final note of a song that had been stuck in my head for years. "Why tell me this now?" I asked gently. "Because I'm leaving him," she said. "And before I go, I needed you to know that you were never the reason he walked away. You were the reason he regretted it." I felt tears burning behind my eyes, not of sadness, but of something close to mercy. "Thank you," I said softly, "for your honesty. It takes courage to face a truth like that." She nodded, eyes glistening. "You change more than you think," she said. "That photo of you, it's everywhere. Women talk about you. They say you gave them strength to leave men like him." I smiled faintly. "I didn't mean to inspire anyone," I said. "I just meant to survive." She took my hand across the table. Small, trembling, human. "That's exactly why you did." For a moment, two women who should have been enemies sat together in quiet understanding. There was no competition, no bitterness, just two lives finally intersecting in truth. When we stood to leave, she paused by the door. "There's one more thing," she said. "That car, the Rolls-Royce. He said it was arrogance, but I know now, it was poetry. Because when you stepped out, you didn't just walk into his wedding, you walked out of his shadow." And with that she left, leaving behind the scent of jasmine and closure. I sat there long after she was gone, letting the truth settle. The pieces of the past that never fit finally clicked into place. All those years of doubt, guilt, confusion, gone, replaced by clarity. When I returned home, Daniel was waiting by the window, as he often was. "You saw her?" he said. "Yes." "And?" "She told me the truth." He didn't ask what it was. He didn't need to. He just nodded and said, "Sometimes the truth isn't meant to hurt. It's meant to heal." I walked toward him and placed my hand over his. "It did both," I said. He looked at me, deeply, lovingly. "Then it's time to stop living in chapters written by others." Outside, The city lights shimmered, reflecting against the polished hood of the Rolls-Royce parked below. The same car that had once symbolized revenge now felt like redemption. Because the truth behind the Rolls-Royce wasn't about wealth or status. It was about rebirth, about showing up to the same place where you were once broken, not to prove a point, but to prove you're whole. But fate wasn't done speaking, because one last letter waited for me, not from him, not from her, but from someone I never thought I'd hear from again. The letter arrived on a Sunday. No return address, just a familiar handwriting. Not from him, not from her. It was from his mother. I hadn't seen her in years. She'd been kind to me once, before everything changed. Now, as I unfolded the letter, the scent of lavender drifted up. The same perfume she wore the day she hugged me goodbye. "I know it's strange hearing from me," she wrote, "but I watched everything. I saw the photos, the interviews, the silence. You don't know how proud I am of the woman you became." My eyes blurred again. I had spent years thinking everyone had chosen sides, but maybe not everyone did. "He's gone now," she continued. "Not gone as in lost, gone as in gone to find himself. And I think you were the mirror that finally showed him what he became." I folded the letter slowly, holding it against my chest. There was no sadness, no bitterness, just gratitude. Because even pain can leave gifts behind when you stop running from it. That evening, Daniel and I drove out of the city. The road curved along the coast, waves brushing against the rocks below, the sun dipping low into the horizon. The Rolls-Royce glided smoothly, no longer a symbol of revenge, but of return. We stopped near a cliff where the ocean met the sky. The wind carried the scent of salt and something like freedom. "This is where I used to come when I wanted to disappear," I said quietly. "And now?" Daniel asked. "Now I come to remember that I didn't." He smiled, pulling me closer. "You turned every ending into a beginning," he said. "No," I whispered. "Life did. I just stopped resisting it." The tide rolled in. The sky turned gold, then pink, then deep violet, and for the first time I felt whole. Not because I won, but because I no longer needed to. Weeks passed. The photo that had once defined me began to fade from the internet's memory, replaced by newer stories, newer faces. But that was okay, because I was never chasing the spotlight. I was chasing peace. And peace, I learned, isn't loud. It's quiet. It's the sound of your own breath after years of holding it. It's the way you smile to yourself in the mirror, not because you're flawless, but because you finally see yourself clearly. One morning, while tending to the garden behind our new home, I found a small envelope slipped under the door. Inside was a photo. The photo. Me in gold, standing tall, calm, unbroken. And on the back, a single line written in careful handwriting. Sometimes silence speaks louder than forgiveness. No name, no signature, but I knew who sent it. I smiled, tucked it into my journal, and went back to planting jasmine, her favorite flower. The scent carried through the air like a full circle closing gently. That night I posted one final message online. Not a quote, not a caption, just a reflection. To every woman who's ever been underestimated, you don't have to prove your worth. You just have to live it. Within hours, comments flooded in. Messages from women across the world. Different languages, same emotion. Gratitude, strength, recognition. And now, as I sit by the window watching the city lights fade, I realize this wasn't a story about heartbreak. It was about awakening. I didn't rise to make anyone regret losing me. I rose to remind myself I was never lost. If you're still here, maybe this story spoke to you too. Maybe you've walked through your own kind of silence, held your own kind of pain, and found strength in the quiet moments no one ever saw. I'd love to know where you're listening from, which corner of the world our stories are reaching tonight. Because every comment you leave reminds me that these tales don't just belong to one woman. They belong to all of us who refuse to stay broken. So, If this story touched something inside you, subscribe, stay close, and let's keep walking through these stories together, where silence becomes strength and heartbreak becomes art.